Welcome to the Grow As We Go podcast. I'm Sam, breathwork coach and self-growth junkie.
And I'm Anthony, your co-host, transformational men's coach, and general question asker.
Here we create space for natural, vulnerable, and deeply connecting conversations on life as it happens, wisdom that I've picked up along the way, and tools to truly enjoy this beautiful life you've been given. I want to appreciate you for being here, whether this is your first time or you've been here since the beginning. We love feedback here, so leave your thoughts and takeaways from this episode in the review section of this podcast. This also helps the podcast become a bit more relevant in search reviews. Another way you can support this podcast is by following me on Instagram at Samantha__Charles and take a screenshot of this episode to share it on your social media and share your takeaways so that your junkie friends can come and get their fix too. Hello. Welcome back
to Grow As We Go. We're writing little poems over here.
All right. So on today's episode, we are going to be talking about what is growth mindset.
Yeah, I think a lot goes unsaid in the idea of growth because people are like, oh, I'm totally growing or I'm growing as a person. And that looks different to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So we're going to talk about what that means for us. So when you think of the word growth mindset, what comes to mind for you, Sam?
I think it's about, for me, it's growing as an individual and like your internal world more so. Like what's going on inside you. You know, I think about Michael Singer's teachings and how you're a soul experiencing your thoughts of your mind, the emotions of your heart, and the world around you, and how you interact and show up as a person for yourself and for others around you. And then, you know, like whenever you think about in relationships, the way that you react, the shit that triggers you, to me, growth is getting to a place where like you're resilient and like unshakable in a way.
Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Like, because, so every one of us is going to define things a little bit differently, right? Mm-hmm. But for you in particular, the ways in which you've grown have led you to a place of resilience and unshakability. Like that has been actually, from what I've heard in your story, a pretty significant identity source for you. Is that fair to say?
How do you mean being resilient and being the steady?
Yeah, that like
the peace.
Yeah, so what I heard you say was like, I get to a place in growth. I get to a place where I'm resilient and unshakable.
Yeah, and I don't mean that in a way that there's a finish line, which I know I spoke about that where I thought there was like a finish line. But where you get to a place where like internally things are not as fucking chaotic and, you know, you get swept away in these waves of emotions and, you know, getting caught up on interactions with people. Like somebody said something and you're like fucked up about it for weeks, you know?
Get up in your head and just stay there for a while.
Can't sleep.
Can't eat, can't breathe. So when you're talking about your internal world, the things that I heard you say were your emotions, your thoughts, and then the way that you view the world around you or your perceptions.
Yeah, perceptions.
So speak more about Michael Singer a little bit. You said that Michael Singer talks about like your internal world. Paint us a picture, or maybe allow me to paint a picture since I'm the visual person here of what that looks like. So do you want to go ahead and do that? You want to give me a shot?
Paint a picture of what that looks like. Well, I think about like, I mean, you know, I'm not a super visual person. Right. When I close my eyes, it's just dark in here. But it's like, so for me, it's dark in here and it's quiet, right? So it's that whole, it's not Michael Singer who says it, I forget, but it's like, you know, the greats, the Dalai Lama and the Buddhas and all that. Like, who hears when I hear? Who sees when I see? Like, who is experiencing that? Who am I? Who's experiencing? And so, because you're not your thoughts, you're not your emotions, you're experiencing those things inside you. And so there's something that's separate from all of that stuff that's going on in your body.
Right. So
the consciousness.
Nice. Yeah. The words that Michael Singer uses are samskaras are what keep you from accessing and knowing and being that person, that consciousness. Because all that stuff gets tangled up in there. So at least for picture-wise, for our visual people, what it kind of looks like is there is this consciousness that exists in the space of our soul or our being or whatever you want to call it. And they're just cobwebs all over the place of our former experiences, where as we experience new things, like if you were to imagine just a new experience is like a dragonfly flying through those spider webs. They get caught up in stuff. Instead of where the cobwebs are clear and the consciousness just is able to say, oh, look, a dragonfly, and watches it fly out of sight and not stick around forever.
Yeah, Michael Singer talks about, and this was helpful for me actually. So Michael Singer talks about your energy and your consciousness, which is what is experiencing, is like a river. And so if you imagine a river bed just clear with sand, the river and the energy, the water of it flows easily and peacefully. And so whenever you have different woundings or samskaras, like he calls it, there's like big stones in the river. And whenever you have stones, it interrupts the flow of the water and it creates rapids. If you have a whole bunch of stones everywhere, it's like, that's rough water. And so if you think about your energy and your experience as the person you are inside, it's like, do you want there to be a clearing of those stones and those boulders so that you have more peace and ease in your river of life, or in your experience of life, or what we get from childhood upbringing and different woundings throughout life is all these boulders in our experience and causing rapids. And anytime maybe there's a section where things are clear, and then here comes the rapids because somebody triggered you, and then the boulders are showing up, and it turns into this like chaotic water situation, which is rough and difficult to fucking navigate and be in. And so to me, growth is healing those boulders to where they go back into the ground, or they go,
So growth is picking up the stones out of the river and getting them out the way.
Yeah, or I don't know, like disintegrating them so that they go on the bottom, because I don't know that you can like get rid of stuff.
Well, sure, yeah, that's absolutely fair.
That's the way I think about it.
Because you certainly can't, but erode them ever so
erode
slightly.
Them, yeah. So but they're not so. And like eroding them, to me, like we think of erosion, it's like water pummeling onto it, you know, like chipping away at it, and I don't know that that's. I mean, that feels more aggressive in a way, like powering through something instead of looking at it, assessing, making shifts every day, and like.
Okay, so like a longer. Well, so I mean, that's what's nice about erosion is that actually it can also happen in just slow ways, right? Like it's just a trickle of water, a drop, and yet it forms these massive cave systems, right?
You're right, yeah.
Yeah, like so there's all different kinds of ways it can happen, because sometimes it is pummeling and it is chaotic. Like growth sometimes happens real quick, real hard, real fast, and sometimes happens growth slowly over time. But the mindset of growth, the idea that we are continuously growing, is important to you in a multitude of ways.
Yeah, and I think it's more... I think everybody grows just through life. Like I talk about this in my breathwork stuff. In the beginning of some of my breathwork sessions, I would talk about life, and, we think about the body and the way that it heals. Really obvious ways are when you scrape your arm, or you get sick, and so your immune system gets activated. And all those things happen without you having to think about it. Your body automatically does these things like a fucking miracle. And I believe that the body wants to be whole, and that includes the brain and the thoughts, the mind, and the emotions that we have. Like I think we're constantly searching for ways to become whole and to become healthy and stable. Like homeostasis is the body's goal. And I think that there's a mental component to that as well.
Right.
And the way that that shows up for people is different because we all are different people and we have different experiences.
Yeah.
And so that's what I teach in breath work and different, meditations and other ways where you're tapping into subconscious.
Okay.
Which is where, gosh, this is going off on a totally different tangent, but this is...
It's important.
It's
and
what
we're
I
talking
do.
about growth mindset. So we're talking about subconscious. We're still in mindset. You're in good shape.
Okay. It's not totally left field.
Nope.
So you go, whenever you can do these different practices to tap into the subconscious, unconscious parts of your mind, which is actually where a lot of all these automatic ways of doing things are stored and kept. And so whenever you meditate or do breath work and you are able to dip into that subconscious, you are able to heal because the mind, the conscious mind in our, wonderful human brains, we're able to keep ourselves stressed by thought alone. We're able to manufacture a stressful state in our body by thinking about a stressful experience. And the body is the subconscious mind. So the body does not know the difference between you are actually in a state of fight or flight because there's a lion chasing you, or you're in a state of fight or flight because you're sitting in traffic and you're stressed out about it, and because you have to be somewhere, or you're running late, like all these different stressors that we wind up in being stressed all fucking day, all day, all week,
every day,
all month, all year for, and then everyone's got anxiety and depression and
PTSD. And
yeah, I mean, it's just, of course you do. You're having anxiety attacks because you've programmed yourself that way.
Certainly not on purpose.
Right. It's all unconscious.
Right. And nobody calls us to consciousness so that we can work through that. Or not nobody, but typically we're not called to consciousness to work through that stuff.
Right. And it's like you don't know what you don't know.
Right.
And so when you do meditation and breath work and you're able to get into these unconscious states, that's where the body takes over, because the body is the unconscious mind and the body is meant to heal and designed to heal and create homeostasis. And so when you, particularly with breath work, we'll just speak about that because that's
your
wheelhouse.
That's your thing.
And whenever you breathe rhythmically for an extended period of time, your conscious mind quiets. And it's a really amazing phenomenon that happens. And when your conscious mind quiets, it's that, human thinking brain that allows us to stay in these states of stress by thought alone. So whenever that's quieted, the body can come in and do what it's designed to do, which is heal. And so that's why I appreciate breath work and the healing that's available without much conversation, without much understanding, because the body is capable of healing beyond our understanding, just as the scrape on your hand or the immune system. You don't have to think about that. You don't have to go to a therapist and have a conversation about what happened to you when you were a kid to know that your body's going to heal itself.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Well, let me ask, when was it that you noticed in your life that shift became so incredibly important that you couldn't do anything else? The shift of like leaning into knowing that your body's going to heal and allowing embodiment to be one of your practices.
Okay. I want to answer that. And I also feel like I started going down that tangent for a reason.
Love it.
And I kind of want to bring it back full circle, and
Please
maybe
do
it just will, but I'm not remembering
We'll get there.
the fork in the road.
Sure. We'll return.
Okay.
Trust that it's going to be what it's going to be.
All right.
So when was that time?
I remember, so I started going to therapy, like talk therapy, when I was 15. I was very depressed, and my mom noticed and was like, hey, you want to go, check out this place that so-and-so did? And I was like, sure, And so I did that and started doing that and got involved in that community where there were like women's circles and men's circles, one-on-one healing, like therapy sessions that I would go to regularly. And then like I would come and go, like I would go through seasons of being regular, seeing this woman, and then, like, okay, I'm good. And then not go for maybe a year or 6 months or whatever the different patterns were there.
Yeah.
And my life would be fucked up. So I'd be like, oh God, I gotta go crawling back.
Please help me.
Because I didn't put anything into place of its place.
Right. No systems, no processes.
Right.
Nothing.
And so it's like, okay, now I get to start back again. And I was doing that for a while, and then, you know, just getting involved in life, and found myself depressed again. And like after I had kids, and it was like, I mean, I talked about this in my story, and it was like 2020 where I like got really depressed and like anxiety about things, and I was like, oh my God, searching for different stuff. And Joe Dispenza meditation. Well, my mom was into like this heart rhythm meditation, and that was interesting. And then she also does IFS, which is internal family system. And I was like, yeah, you know, like I'm doing this therapy thing, but I didn't realize how drastically different it was. So yeah, I think it was like my depression, you know, that sent me into having things put in front of me, like Joe Dispenza meditation. And I got like obsessed with that whole idea of, you can heal your life, and you're in charge of what goes on inside here. And, you know, the idea of manifesting and in co-creating with the universe. And like, that was so exciting to me, because I was like, oh my God, this is the answer. Like, I have always known and been obsessed with like I went to school for veterinary technician. I was going to do nursing, but, you know, as a kid, I would like dissect animals that had died.
Yeah.
And we lived out in the country, and like, I loved like the way that bodies worked, and just, it's phenomenal, the intelligence that's there. And I knew there was like a knowing that I didn't really know how to describe, that we are capable of so much greatness, like magical greatness. And to me, learning about like manifesting and co-creating with the universe, and your energy and what you put out is what you attract, like all of that energetic stuff, learning about that, I was like, this is it.
Right.
Oh my God, I have found the holy grail that I knew was there all along. And yeah, I mean, I went down a lot of rabbit holes and like took in information like a fucking fire hose, and just learning about all these different things. And Joe Dispenza and Wim Hof breath work were really huge catalysts into my growth journey and my learning of knowledge, which is what we were talking about, like just siphoning in this like plethora of knowledge, because there's no shortage of shit out there.
Right, absolutely. Like, I was just thinking about how a lot of your knowledge had to do with embodiment, right? Like, pretty much everything that you took in was like, all right, I get to do breath work, I get to do ice baths, I get to do meditation, I get to do, like, it was a lot of embodiment practices, as practices around how the body works and the body functions. And not that it wasn't about the mind, but it was about how the mind is not the source of that, like the body is the source of your growth. Is that accurate to say?
I feel like my learning was about both of them, like the mind and the body being one.
Sure.
And, you know, I read this book, Waking the Tiger, where they talk about that, like in Western culture. That's us, right? Like, we're Western.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
Okay, so like in Western culture, we tend to separate the two. We treat both of them with medications, right? But it's like we treat the mind with talk therapy, and then we treat the body with like Western medicine and like pills, and a pill for an ill sort of thing. And we treat them as separate without realizing that they work together.
Right.
And
they're co-creators.
They're co-creators, just like we are with the universe. Right. And it's just like, oh my gosh, there's so much magic in there that like that we can't. Oh my.
But it took a while for you to get there. Like, it wasn't like you started thinking about growth as a whole, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, our bodies are magical. Like, it took time.
Kind of. I feel like it was like, oh my God, this is the answer. Like, I knew it.
Well, yeah, but what I mean is that it wasn't like you started thinking about growth or like getting into the pattern of, okay, I'm going to go talk to people and I'm going to do something that like do some kind of practice that helps me move through that, especially because you're talking about when you're 15 and 16 and 17 and going to therapy, right? Like you're talking about that, and then it took you a while throughout that process, all throughout your 20s, and to get to that place where you're like, oh, this is it.
Right.
And I feel that, like, on a spiritual level, because, so with my growth journey, mine was very much head knowledge.
Yeah.
All of it. I mean, I just read, as I said in my story, I read voraciously. Like, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say I read 300 books in seminary alone. So, like, you know, over the course of 4 years, it's just, you just read constantly. I read constantly when I was in the pit of despair so that I could try and claw my way out of it.
Yeah.
So I just consistently took in knowledge. Like you said, a fire hose, just, yes, this is all of it. Come on. When am I going to learn the thing that's going to fix me? Like, just consistently taking in that stuff. But it was all about, too, how you related to people. It was about how people related to each other. It was about how healing worked in the therapy and, like, self-help world. It was a lot of information that honestly was tremendously helpful. But for both you and for me, if it's accurate to say this for you, there was something still missing, even though we had learned a crap ton of information about growth. And we had grown in significant ways too. But there's something different. Right, there's something different that we needed to do, say. We didn't know at that point. So what was the, after we took in information, way to move forward?
Well, I think it's like putting things into practice and making shifts. And for me, developing habits, which, you know, I found to be an incredible, and I mean, I still struggle with this, if I'm being completely honest and transparent.
It's okay.
Like, creating new habits.
Yeah.
And a daily routine and being disciplined about it. And like, I mean, I get very like, go with the flow, whatever, just into the flesh, whatever I want to do, you know, what's like, I don't really feel like doing that right now. I don't feel like doing breath work this morning. I woke up late. I feel like sleeping in, you know, stuff like that. So that has been my big challenge, and something I still like continue to work on. And it's interesting to think about that. So like, I think of that from a growth mindset. Like everything in life, I feel like is an opportunity for growth at this point.
That's huge. What you just said is like a summation of what growth mindset is. Everything is an opportunity to grow. Yeah.
And that was one of the things too that I got from my the ALA experience is like, you can go through life as a victim and or, you know, either as a victim or as like life is happening to you. And you're just being thrown passive. That's the word. So it's like, I know the word victim sometimes can like trigger people, but it's like there's a way that it's like you're passive and not, you know, it's not empowering, right? Like life just happens. These things just happen.
And you have to deal with it.
Instead of like, okay, what if we shifted and I created this for myself? And people are like, oh, why would I create a car crash? And that was something that like Joe Dispenza talked about a lot. And I love his work a lot. He's like, you know, why would I create a car crash for myself? It's like, well, you created that out of unconsciousness because you weren't creating whatever. And like your body may have given you cues and the universe may have given you other opportunities and you continually chose not to take those jumps or those leaps out of fear, out of not like avoiding shame or wanting to be right or not wanting to look bad or wanting to have control over things. And so some of these stuff is like the fear of the unexpected or of the unknown, which is a lot of Joe Dispenza's teaching, the unknown. And I mean, that's a huge fear for humans, instinctually, I think. And, you know, for our mind, especially. So if you're letting your mind rule, the unknown's not going to happen. Right. And
we'll get caught up in a lot of that sense of, I created this. Like, no, I didn't create this. I didn't want to do that. No, of course. Nobody wants to.
Yeah.
But what happens, well, you go ahead with it. Nobody wants to create that, but.
Yeah, nobody wants to have a car crash or have that experience or...
And it's not their fault either.
Right. It's not that it's your fault. And how can you take an empowering position of it? Like, oh, this just happened. Or it's like, okay, what have I been ignoring up until now?
Mm-hmm.
What can I shift?
Mm-hmm.
How is this an opportunity for me to reflect on the way I've been showing up in life?
Mm-hmm.
I think about car crashes. I mean, that just like, it feels like a very extreme example.
Sure. Right.
But it's like, yeah, like how are you showing up and what choices can you make, making shifts and putting things into practice so that you are energetically aligned with the life that you're wanting to create.
Right. And that's part of the unconsciousness and the growth mindset, like the two foils or like opposites of each other, right? It's unconsciousness and then growth mindset. That you get to create which one of those is going to happen out of every single opportunity. And sometimes your body, your mind, your world that you want to have isn't clear. And the world and mind and life that you want to have is, I don't know. And that means that's unconscious. And for some people, and if we look back at the history of stories over millennia and tons of time, people don't always know what they want in life until the crazy, weird, awful, bad thing happens to them. And then they're like, there is no other way that I could live my life except to right this wrong or work through this tragedy or whatever it may be. And nobody's like, yes, I can't wait to, let me use an example of like an ancient story. Nobody's like, yes, I can't wait to get swallowed by a giant fish in order to like figure out my stuff. Mm-hmm. But if you're consistently not conscious in what your mission and what your desired life is, things are going to happen to bring that to light because we're not made to live in unconscious thought and unconscious being. So talk a little bit more about unconscious being, like how that shows up.
Yeah. Well, I think about an example for me that I've thought is like, if you take into consideration or can just accept this way of thinking for a minute to imagine, like your body's incredibly wise and it extends beyond your body. Mm-hmm. So there's this energy. Mm-hmm. And like, I can describe that like you walk into a room and people have been fighting and you walk into the room and there's this dense energy mm-hmm. and you can tell.
Yeah, it's tension.
It's tension. Yeah, you can feel the tension in the room. And I'm sure like a lot of people can relate to that. Yeah. Whether you know, even if you didn't experience any of the verbal communication, right? You just walk into the room, everyone's quiet and it's like, what just happened in here? Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of energetic experiences that I've had around that where it's like some shit went down here. Mm-hmm. But so that's like what I mean when our consciousness and energy expands beyond our physical body. Mm-hmm. And
our unconsciousness then does too.
Right. And I think about if you've stubbed your toe on the edge of the bed 3 times in a row in the same day.
Yeah. Whoops.
Right?
Yeah, definitely done that before.
Yeah. And it's like that bed frame is always there.
Right.
And your body knows where it is. Uh-huh. And somehow you're walking into it. And every time I have this conversation with people, like their response is, yeah, and it typically is when you're already in a shit mood and it just makes it worse.
Right.
It's like, okay, so what's happening? Like, how can, instead of getting pissed off at the bed or like, like more irritated with, you know, whatever's going on in your mind and your world, what if you took a breath and took a step back and was like, okay, what's going on here? Mm-hmm. What is my body trying to tell me? Mm-hmm. What is the universe trying to tell me? What is happening? Am I not in alignment with what I'm creating today?
Right.
And do I need to be making some shifts so that it's like a wake-up call is the way that I see it. And so it's like, that's what I mean when it's like everything is an opportunity for growth.
Right. So what I've heard you say then is that growth mindset is a few different things. We've got resilience and unshakability. That like things can happen and you don't fall apart. Mm-hmm. You've got consciousness, that you choose to make conscious decisions or empowered versions of whatever's happening around you. Mm-hmm. So instead of saying it's happening to me, You get to say, this is happening for me. How can I grow from this?
Right.
And then another thing that I heard you say, which I might not be able to remember in this moment, was basically that growth is taking the stuff that you've learned and then doing something, putting it into practice.
Yeah. And I think that's like, a bit of integration that we've talked about before. I don't think on this podcast yet, but it's coming.
It's an episode all in and of itself.
Yeah.
But we talked, so there's an analogy here for all of this. We talked a little bit about, when we talk about growth, what often happens, at least for me, and this is what did happen when I was telling my story about what I thought growth was, it was I'm learning all this stuff. And when I was young, it was easy for me to integrate things. It was easy for me to take what I learned and basically put it into practice because I just ended up teaching it to people right away. Like if I learned it and thought it was valuable, I was telling everybody about it.
Yeah.
Like that, and that is really integrating for me. And so then it becomes a part of who I am, and then I live that way.
There's that like learn it, teach it, do it, or do it,
Something
teach it.
like that. I don't know.
Come on, teacher.
You're exactly right.
No, but that is a thing. Like
yeah.
I remember, it's like you see, like that was a big thing in training for like our veterinary technician thing. It's like see one, do one, teach one.
Yes, exactly. That's good. I like that.
Yeah.
Because that's the process, right? Once you're able to show everybody else how to do it, but like.
So it's like, taking that into this, it's like see one, do one, teach one, learn it, practice it, teach it.
Yeah.
Which for me is hilarious. So I'm like, learn it, teach it, I'll try to do it. That's been my like such a poser.
Yeah, you've always gotten a little heated at yourself for that.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
But because I'm telling everybody else to do it. But well, and this is the growth process.
Yeah.
So this is the growth mindset. So imagine, close your eyes if you really need to. Can't visualize things, but that's okay. You don't have to close your eyes. But imagine a flower just in the middle of a field all by itself. It's been planted, receiving the sunlight, receiving water, and receiving the food, the nutrients from the ground. That isn't growth, right? Like when you think about all those things coming, like filling you up, growth is not that which comes to you. It's not the nutrients itself. Growth is when those nutrients produce fruit or flowers.
Right.
And so if you think about your growth and your growth mindset, it's going to be what has changed in my life as a result of the things that I've taken in. Because the fact of the matter is, as I've heard you say before and someone else say before, there are a lot of people who have learned about growth and they haven't done much growth on their own. Yeah.
Well, that's the integration piece, I think. And what you're speaking about is like, okay, if I'm a plant in that analogy, I'm a beautiful flower.
You are.
And the knowledge and the wisdom I've received through a fire hose is the sunlight and the water and my soil. But I'm not like intaking it into my body and like using it to grow.
Yeah, and produce fruit.
Right. It's like there's a disconnect there.
Right.
And to me, right, it's like I get myself frustrated about it. Like, why can't I like integrate this? It's like, okay, there's a boulder in the way.
Yeah.
What's the boulder?
Yeah. Or the rocks at the root. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's, that's the empowering thing that I was speaking about before, where like, how is this pattern, this cycle that I am unconsciously creating, how is it serving me, and how can I learn from it in a space of curiosity and like empowerment? Yeah.
So let's dive into that question or that statement, because you said, how is this serving me? And I think with growth mindset, asking that question is one of the huge elements of integration and really being able to grow. You say, how is this serving me? What does that question mean? And then we'll talk about an example of it.
Well, I already have an example of it, so I'm just going to go with that. So what that question means is like, how is it serving me? And whenever I first remember being asked this about a specific pattern that I've had that is clearly, I've had for a really long time.
Yep.
and was more or less unconscious to it. I was like, why is this always happening? Why? And it's like, okay, well, how is it serving you? I'm like, it's not. It's irritating, and the pattern is like forgetfulness, and amnesia, I lovingly would call it amnesia. And it's like there was a couple different things that all worked together in that. It was like amnesia and this forgetfulness, and there was another piece to it that I'm
getting confused.
Yeah, confusion and amnesia.
Yeah.
And it's like they work together, right? Because if I can't remember, then I'm confused. And so somebody had asked me, how is this serving you? And I'm like, it's not. I don't want to be like this, you know? Like, there's no way it's serving me. And she was like, well, it is.
Yeah.
And if you could be open to that, which is another thing, right? Like growth mindset, like you get to be open to these things.
Everything, yes.
And not everybody's open to it, and that's okay.
No. Unless you want to be in a growth mindset.
I mean,
that's what we're here for, right?
Right. And I don't mean to like say that in a judgmental way or like that anything's right, wrong, bad, good. It just is. Yeah. And so you were talking about confusion and how these things served you. Yeah, perfect, right? Clearly. Perfect metaphor. And how these things served you. She said, are you open to that? Yeah. Are you open to it serving you in a way? And if you could imagine how it has served you, what would that look like? And immediately the thought behind it was like, well, so I can stay in relationship. And I'm like, what the,
where does that
come from? And then I get confused again. What does that even mean?
Right.
How am I staying in? And so
I remember having this conversation with you in particular, like you
me sharing about that experience, because it wasn't with you that I discovered that.
Right. It wasn't the discovery, but like you were like, why do I do that? And I was like, I have a theory.
Yeah. But so the conversation, it was through ALA. It was one of my coaches, and she was talking about this, and it's like, okay, so I can stay in relationship. She's like, okay, so how does that serve you in relationship? And I'm like, well, if I forget the things that have happened that are not so great, then I can stay in relationship because so I can stay, I forget about it because it's too hard to imagine being in a relationship with somebody who would do that, that's supposed to be taking care of me. And I'm talking about like, this is childhood wounding, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and with the people who are supposed to be taking care of me, I forget what happened so I can stay in relationship and still be taken care of as a child. And as I'm saying that, it's funny because I didn't, that came out of left field for me, and I didn't have an understanding of it. But it's like, there's always that little voice and that quietness whenever you're asked questions. It's like, trust your gut, trust the first thought. The first thought is always the one. And so I just went with it, and we're talking, and I was like, whoa, I've been doing this in all my relationships forever. And it's compounded with this like staying too long in relationships when they're not making sense anymore, but I'm forgetting what has happened and forgetting how we're interacting, and then feeling confused, and then just staying because that's what's safe. So that's an unconscious pattern.
Sure.
Well, that was brought to light. Yeah. And now I get to have consciousness around it, and it's interesting because since then my memory has been like
on fire.
It's shocking.
Yeah. It's amazing. It's a totally different shift.
Yeah.
I haven't heard you say, I'm confused, maybe more than once in the past, 4 or 5, 6 months.
Yeah.
There's been a totally different shift of being in you, and that's growth, right?
Yes.
That's the growth. So you can...
A shift in being.
Yes. It very much is a shift in being. And out of curiosity, too, do you remember when your first memory was? When can you first remember something happening? Anything, whatever it may be.
Well, so that's what's interesting is because my mom took a lot of pictures and videos, and so I have memories of watching those, and I don't feel like those are actual memories of mine had I not seen those things.
Right.
But I can remember being 8.
Right. Yeah, and that's...
Some things I think 8, maybe 7 or 6, a couple little things, but they start trickling in a little bit more, 8, 9, 10.
Sure.
13, 15. There's years that I don't remember anything.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was getting at, is wondering how has that childhood wounding carried over, right? Because in growth mindset, it's really, growth mindset is the superpower to our childhood wounds, right? Like we get to make something out
our
of this.
superpowers.
Exactly, exactly. Because whatever it is that our wounding is turns into something empowering for us when we choose to view it as empowering.
Oh, love this. Okay.
So that's why growth mindset is so helpful and effective.
Right.
At getting us to a place.
Turning those traumas into superpowers.
It's my favorite thing in the whole wide world. I used to think I loved to remember people's names just because it was super fun. And then I realized, I remember people's names because if I don't take in every piece of information in any environment that I'm in, then I could be unsafe and I don't want to be in danger. So now I just do it because it is fun and I realize that those things, I'm not in danger anymore. But it also now for me is a way that I make impact. Right?
Yeah.
Like I can connect with people on a really powerful level because I remember their name, I remember their story. And even though I used to take in information to keep myself safe, I now take in information for a different reason. But it's still the same task. The growth is not necessarily in just what happens. There's a difference between like, something happened because like landing a client because you learned something is very different from making a difference in someone's life because you were transformed. Like, see, results don't always mean growth, but transformation is always a result of growth. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay, so remember when you were talking about how you were growing and you were learning things and you took in information like a fire hose, but the confusion and stuff didn't really stop until like 6-7 months ago, right? Transformation is that you're no longer feeling confused. You're no longer feeling your mind get cloudy. You're not feeling your memory be as bad as it used to be.
Okay.
That's transformation, and therefore there's growth that happened there.
Yeah.
And that's a fruit that you produced is remembering what goes on and wanting to lean into your experiences and not forget the things that happen.
Right.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah.
So there's a difference between results, which is like anybody can produce results if they work hard enough. Like you can, if you water the plant and you give it the right amount of food and you do the thing, it might grow up. But there's something different in it really producing abundant fruit.
Yeah, one like co-creating with the universe is how I feel like. And I think about, whenever you're talking about this plant, I think about the experiment I did with my kids where you get 2 plants, you water them the same, you put them in the same sunlight, and you say nice things to one of them, like, oh, you're so beautiful, thank you for cleaning the air and expressing gratitude, and I love the energy that you put off in this space, making it more beautiful. And then to the other one, you're mean, like, I hate you, you're so ugly. Like, just it was interesting to me how difficult it was to do that to a plant.
Oh, right.
That was my like, oh,
it didn't
gosh,
do anything to you.
I know, like, this poor plant, like, I'm gonna kill it. And what ended up happening is the plant, like, the one that you're being mean to starts to shrivel, actually, even though it's getting the same amount of water and the same amount of sunlight and whatever. And the one that you're being nice to, like, flourishes. And so with that, it's like the energy behind things and the integration of things, if you want to, kind of make those the things. So it's like the water and the sunlight are the information, and then the energy and the intention is the integration.
Right. So you can do things out of fear. You absolutely can. You can live your whole life out of fear, and you can get results. People who are very afraid have gotten incredible results in the world, right? Like, I'm afraid that something bad is going to happen, so I'm going to create this device or this thing that makes that bad thing not happen.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I don't know how the seatbelt was made, but I imagine it wasn't that someone was like, what would be really good and make a huge impact in people's lives is strapping them into a seat in a moving automobile. I'm sure people are like, we don't really want people to die, so I'm scared of that happening, so let's create the seatbelt. Great, you've made big impact, and like, thank you for the seatbelt. Wonderful. And if you continue to do every bit of your life out of fear, you might get results. Things might happen. But when you are growing, you're making those moves out of an empowered place. And so the results are totally different. because they're expansive and transformative, and they make ripple effects happen.
Yeah, the ripple effect, and I think that also like ties into the co-creating with the universe, and stuff starts coming your way because you're making these ripple effects, and people start to hear about it, or they want to contribute and they want to support you, and they know somebody, and so all these things like conspire in your favor. I feel like is what.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
everything is working in your favor. Everything is on your side, and yeah, you get the choice because you can say, I don't really think everything works for me. I don't really think everything is on my side. And then what you're doing is you're in opposition to the energy of the universe, because you believe that the energy of the universe is out to get you. And that's fear.
Yeah.
Right. And that also comes out of a place of wounding. People have probably come and tried to get you and try to hurt you. And we create space for that, for people to say those words and feel that and find themselves in that moment. But growth is being able to say, even though that has been my reality in the past, I get to look at things in a different way.
Yeah. Now. Yeah. And seeing each day as a new opportunity, a new opportunity to create something new and something different and exciting, and not always living in the past. Yeah.
Beautiful. So there's growth mindset is, yes, I got my thoughts aligned, right? But for you in particular, you do embodiment practices a lot. So what do you think the connection is? I mean, you talked a little bit about this, but between your thoughts and between the embodiment of everything that you're doing?
Well, I think it's just being in alignment. And when things are in alignment, you don't have these polar conversations constantly happening to where you're not moving, you're not making movement forward energetically or physically, you know, and then you feel lost or you feel overwhelmed, and then you're like circling the drain. And so when you can have the knowledge in the mind, and then you can embody it with your body, and have this like homeostasis and synergistic.
It's like rhythm and dance.
Almost. Right. And having your mind and your body aligned is incredibly important. You know, because there's always this like, oh, my mind is telling me yes.
My mind telling me what my body is telling me yes.
And it's like
I grew up in church singing all the time.
Yeah. But that's what I mean about the conflict, right? It's like, oh, I know better, but I want to do this thing.
Right.
And it's just this constant conflict. And like, what would it be like to not have that, to be in alignment and know and to me, being in alignment, I think the mind is great. And I don't believe it's what you should lead with in your life.
Of course not.
And I also think that there's a lot of healing that needs to happen before you can go around trusting your heart or your body or your gut, right? Because you hear a lot of like, oh, go with your heart. It's like, yeah, well, my heart's telling me to stay in this abusive relationship because it's like trauma bonded.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Because like, I'm a head leader, right? Like you're like, I can't lead with my head. Of course not. Because like, you're also very feminine in your energy, and it's about flow and it's about feeling. And I'm very masculine, and it's very much like my logic, my mind, right? So I'm served, right? How did that serve me in my whole life, being led by my head? Well, you know, it wasn't the greatest, but but learning from you the embodiment practices has been incredibly transformative for me. And then you've been working on your mindset, so you didn't need me for that. I don't even know why you keep me around.
Oh my gosh.
So anywho, coming back to this, when it comes to having a mindset of growth, how would you suggest that our listeners start or continue their process in a way that would be helpful to them, so that they don't feel like I've hit a finish line?
I mean, what comes up when I hear that is surrounding yourself with people who don't accept or tolerate mediocrity.
Ooh, so
and
good.
Like allow you to stay stuck in patterns and accept you for, it's like, accept me for who I am. I don't really want that, if I'm being honest. Like, yeah, sure, meet me where I am.
Yes.
But
yes. And accept.
And love.
but love you way too much to let you stay in that pattern.
Exactly. And if you don't have people in your life like that, go find them.
Here we are.
I'm here.
We're but a phone call away. but it's appointment away.
But I think that, and I think just following the little obsessions, that's been my personal journey, and everyone's, different in what makes sense for them, but following your heart in that sense, the pull within you to learn about something, like, oh man, that is so interesting, let me dive a little bit deeper into that and understand, and how can I reflect what I'm learning and translate it from this book into my life, and what shifts get to happen.
What shifts get to happen when you talk about shifts, it's, I was thinking about this one way, I was embodying this one way, and now I get to think and embody it differently.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it's about awareness and presence when it's just you with you.
Ooh.
And when you're alone, what choices are you making? How are you talking to yourself? Just creating awareness there. Because I know for me, for a very long time, there was this unconsciousness and this like disassociating where I wasn't present, and I couldn't tell you what happened yesterday.
No wonder you're confused.
Right, yeah. But it's like this disassociating thing that happens, and I think that there's that, and there's various reasons why people end up like that, but, just an unconsciousness, right? Like going through the motions and habits, the body is the unconscious mind, and so the body, whenever you form a habit, you have to think and be conscious about doing it differently. And so that's what I think about whenever you're on your growth journey. It's about thinking about your thoughts and noticing your thoughts and being a witness more often. And whatever you need to do, set an alarm, put sticky notes on your computer, on your mirror when you brush your teeth, to remind you as you're forming this new habit of becoming more and more aware of your thoughts and the actions and decisions and ways of being.
Yeah. There's a quote that I have that I use all the time, is if you're good enough at something, you won't just have to say it out loud.
Right.
Like you're going to show it. You're going to show exactly who you are. And so your growth mindset, when you're able to align your mind, your body, your heart,
yes,
then you'll be able to see that growth happen.
Right. Well, it's like we were talking about your mind and your body being in alignment, and when your body and your mind are in alignment, your words and your actions match up. And that's like,
that's your favorite thing, because poser is not your favorite thing.
I know,
and
right?
that's why you get so down on yourself.
I'm like, you're not in alignment, And so what's happening here? And just like curiosity instead of getting down on yourself.
That's, beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, curiosity is majestically important.
Yeah,
we don't get curious with ourselves.
And having grace.
Quick to judge. Yeah.
Having grace with yourself, of like,
Again, that's part of the awareness and part of the presence.
Yeah.
Right? And we'll talk about that in a future episode, that awareness and that power and that presence. Because it's so difficult for folks to be in that state of being able to say, I notice this pattern. I am aware of this pattern now. In my awareness, I surrender to the fact that this is part of my life, and I don't get to have that be part of my life anymore. I get to give that up. But that's in the future episode. But still, you are absolutely right in that growth is the process by which the things that we are doing are aligning with everything that we are.
Yeah.
And so growth, really, when it comes down to it, is about being.
Human beings.
Not human doings.
Beautiful. If you found parts of this podcast interesting, useful, or at the very least entertaining, I hope that you'll share your takeaways and tag me on social media, or leave a review. And we appreciate you, and we'll see you next time.